Minorities are just too precious to ever be treated as human. This is the opinion of Vox.com, of course, because why not? And I thought we'd go through it because this relates to AI. Remember all the AI stories? How they were very funny? Yeah. So I thought I'd start with some shilling here, of course, being the origins of intersectionality, the premium video that we did together, looking at Kimberly Crenshaw's original writings, because they're also going to come into play, of course, as to what's fair.
Yeah, well, this was very useful to know because this is the very inception in 1989 of all of the problems that we find now, and it's very revealing how she works within the institutional logic of liberal human rights discourse.
And if we go forward, we can see, well, some of that engaging, at least, Vox's interpretation of AI. We'll start off, just to mention, because everyone will remember, surely, the Islamophobic AI problem.
Well, we did a hangout on this too, didn't we?
So this was GPT-3. I'm sure people will remember, so we won't go over the full thing. But they asked the AI to make a bunch of plays, and the plays kept making the Middle Easterners terrorists because it was based on the public's interpretation of reality instead of, well, progressive interpretation of reality.
The AI only had news to go
Yeah,
on.
it only had reality to go on. We'll go to the next one, because the same lady who wrote that has written this article now. A new AI draws delightful and not so delightful images.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, sure, what's upset? Well, they released it to the public and quickly found out that it isn't kind to... Oh, sorry. OpenAI is well aware that DALL-E 2 generates results exhibiting gender and racial bias. So when you ask it to draw an image, it's racist and sexist.
Right, okay.
Its interpretations. OpenAI researchers made some attempts to resolve bias and fairness problems, but they couldn't really root out these problems in an effective way because different solutions resulted in different trade-offs, she says. For example, the researchers wanted to filter out sexual content from the training data because that could lead to disproportionate harm to women.
Right, okay.
Don't really know how, but okay. Shog is that.
I mean, as I understand it, this DALL-E, you give it a phrase, sort of like, draw me a monkey on the moon or something.
And it will draw it.
And it will, using its AI databases and algorithms, create a monkey on the moon.
So they got rid of all the women in porn because they thought that it would bias the results to make women sexy, and therefore that would harm women.
But the point is, none of this can harm anyone because it's just drawing a picture.
Yeah. But they found when they tried to filter out the pornography, DALL-E 2 generated fewer images of women in general. You get rid of the porn, the AI doesn't recognize women as
that's very
real.
based. That's very based.
The author writes that's no good because it leads to another kind of harm to women, erasure.
This is one of the things I talk about in the 40K thing, actually.
They're going to erase women by getting rid of the porn, or at least the AI doesn't recognize women after not looking at porn. Right. For now, only about 400 people get to use DALL-E 2, and she gives the reasoning in here, and it's because of GPT-3, the Islamophobia bot.
God, that's a real shame because I'd love to have some access to this.
Yeah, so they released the Islamophobia bot publicly, and everyone had fun.
Yeah.
And then they've panicked in the AI world and have released this under the guise of fixing it, quotes and quotes,
it's
before it goes
so
public.
weird how they can't just admit that there are issues with the things being represented by the bots. So weird. Like, no Muslim has ever done anything wrong. Therefore, it's the AI that's at fault.
Women have never tried to be sexy on the internet.
Yeah, exactly. Women don't trade on their sexual appeal to gain influence over men.
No, that's why Instagram failed.
Yeah, exactly. That's why OnlyFans isn't a thing.
It's bankrupt. And if we go to the next article, because this has all gone on and it's all been very, very funny, and I've enjoyed it.
I love the struggle. Fox just like, look, the AI.
Yeah. She's released this new article, the same woman here. There's some senior reporter for them as well. I'm assuming she's on fair money working for them. And she's come up with this. Why it's so damn hard to make AI fair and unbiased.
How is it unfair?
Well, she will give you 50 million definitions of fair and it will violate one of them.
Right. Okay.
I'm not joking, so I'm just going to argue. But let's go through this, because this article I just found hilarious reading it. Let's play a little game. Imagine you're a computer scientist. Your company wants you to design a search engine that will show users a bunch of pictures corresponding to their keywords, sometimes akin to Google Images. On a technical level, that's a piece of cake. You're a great computer scientist, and this is basic stuff. But say you live in a world where 90% of CEOs are male. This is where the problem's going to come in, is it?
CEOs, I just want to note, not computer scientists.
No. Sort of like our world, she says. Should you design your search engine so that it accurately mirrors the reality, yielding images of men after men after men when a user types in CEO? Stop there. Yes.
Well, no. It'd be every 9 out of 10 images would be an image of a man.
Yeah.
So,
Should you make it look at reality? well, yeah. That would be anyone else's pursuit of this, but she goes, no, that's the problem. Or since that risks in reinforcing gender stereotypes that helps keep women out of the C-suite. I don't know how. She doesn't back that up.
Hang on, no, this is great, right? Because the idea is that it's not reality that is the source of the stereotype. It is our perception of reality. And since our perception of reality is overwhelmingly dominated by media, like the Google searches and stuff like that. I mean, how many CEOs do you meet in your daily life? Then they think, well, there we go. That'll be the narrative. CEOs are male.
It's obviously crazy. It's like, which informs reality? Is it reality or the perception of reality? Obviously, reality. Idiots. Anyway, but then
There's a big discussion to be had there, in fact.
Computer scientists are used to thinking about bias in terms of its statistical meaning. A program for making predictions is biased if it's consistently wrong in one direction
but
or
if
another.
it's consistently right and we don't like it...
For example, she says, if a weather app always overestimates the probability of rain, its predictions are statistically biased. Yes, such as a search engine that overestimates women as CEOs will also be statistically biased. She can't figure that one out because she's too much of a brainlet, apparently. That's very clear, but it's also very different from the way most people colloquially use the term bias, which is more like prejudiced against a certain group or characteristic.
Right. And so AI, not having any emotional state, can't be negatively prejudiced against a certain group or characteristic. It has no opinion, moral value, good or bad, about any characteristics.
But
it doesn't care.
What if we, wholly progressive society, just put one in her example, against men? As CEOs.
Well, exactly. Then you are biasing the AI. But the thing is that they're projecting their opinions onto the machine. They're anthropomorphizing it.
She continues, the problem is that if there's a predictable difference between two groups on average, then these two definitions will be at odds. If you design your search engine to make statistically unbiased predictions about the gender breakdown among CEOs, then it will necessarily be biased in the second sense of the word. No.
That's impossible.
It doesn't make any sense.
It won't even be contingently biased.
And if you design it to not have its predictions to correlate with gender, it will necessarily be biased in the statistical sense.
That's true.
But just like, what the hell is any of this reasoning? Like, it'll be biased in this way in the fact that it'll be serving reality. That's a bias, is it?
But the AI can't be prejudiced.
No.
And so saying it will be necessarily prejudiced in the second sense of the word.
Well,
sorry, no, it won't.
She's defined reality itself as a bias.
As prejudiced against women, yeah.
It is reality itself is a prejudice because it's then prejudiced against women and its outcomes.
Yeah.
And therefore, that's just as valid, or at least calling that a bias, is just as valid as my fantasy world that I've made up where things should be as I think they should be, based on, well, your own bigotries and nothing else.
Do you remember a few years ago when feminists were saying that 1 in 4 women on a college campus would be raped?
Yeah.
What happened to that? That disappeared, didn't it? But now we're talking about the bias of the AI when determining CEO results.
Yeah.
I thought that 25% of women on college campuses were being raped. Why aren't you writing about that?
Don't know. That's
anyway.
Not part of the reality.
Yeah, I guess it's just not true, is it?
She says, whilst you're chewing on that, consider the fact that there's just no one definition of bias. There is no one definition of fairness either. Fairness can have many different meanings, and we're going to have a big old lecture about fairness. And I'm going to skip over most of it because it's just her rambling. But then she goes on to give us some concrete examples that we can actually play with. And she says, how do you decide who should get a loan? Well, how do you think she's going to decide it?
Skin color?
Of course. Here's another thought experiment. Let's say you're a bank officer and part of your job is to give out loans. You use an algorithm to help figure out who you should give money to based on a predictive model, chiefly taking into account their FICO credit score. About how likely they are to repay, most people with a FICO credit score above 600 get the loan. Most below don't get the loan.
Okay.
Simple system. The liberal world, the ideal there. But we go on reality instead of...
But it's also common sense. I mean, if you
can pay it back, I'll give you the loan.
Yeah, exactly. If your chief interest is having that money paid back, and so you can make a profit by, having a cut of that, like, an percentage increase of that, then that's what you would be considered. But if you're concerned about, say, social justice...
No concerns for money whatsoever here. No. Although, weirdly, of course, will end up screwing themselves. One type of fairness, termed procedural fairness, she says, would hold that an algorithm is fair if the procedure it uses to make decisions is fair.
Now, I just want to be clear here. This is something I've talked about before as well. And procedural fairness is the very heart of liberalism.
Equal treatment.
Yes.
Like, we're going to treat you the same if you are the same.
Yes.
That means it would judge all the applicants based on the same relevant facts, like their payment history. Given the same set of facts, everyone would get the same treatment, regardless of their individual traits like race.
Sold. Absolutely sold.
This sounds like a good system for lending out money. Won't
Or
collapse.
for anything, really.
Like, it's just, and she says, by that measure, your algorithm's doing just fine.
Yes.
As if there should be other measures, such as, well, of course, race is going to be her measure. But let's say members of one racial group are statistically much more likely to have a FICO score above 600. I'm going to say Jews here for that one, just because I want to see where this is going to go. So Jews are going to pay it back. That's because they are the highest income earners, or one of the highest in the United States.
Yeah, that's true.
So we'll use that.
Could use Indians as well.
Yeah, sure. And above 600, and
Or
members...
Chinese. There are loads of racial groups in America doing better than the whites.
None of them whites. Actually, whites are kind of in the middle to the lower ranks these days. So, and members are much more likely to not pay it back as well. A disparity that can have its roots in historical and policy inequities, like redlining, that your algorithm does nothing to take into account. So she's saying that, right, Jews are going to pay the money back, but the black guys presumably are not going to, because they've got lower FICO scores on average. This is the idea. And therefore, this is some kind of injustice. Like, the Jews paying their money back is an injustice against the black people.
But what is amazing about this is it's not the black people's fault that they don't pay the money back.
No.
Redlining has done this to them.
Historical inequities have done this.
You, as an individual, took a loan and you didn't pay it back and your score went down.
Yeah. But also, it is harm done to the black community by any other minority that pays back their loans.
Yes.
What they should do, and the honourable thing to do, is to not pay back their loans.
So they're equal.
Go bankrupt, so they can be lower on the scale, and then blacks will just rise to the top.
Well, no, then it's equalised, because otherwise you've created an inequality by the fact that you've done the virtuous thing when the black community isn't expected to pay their loans back.
I don't think progressives want Jews to ever be equal. I think they want them definitely at the bottom. Let's be frank. Whenever you hear them talk about Israel, you can address this by giving different groups differential treatment. For one group, you make the FICO score cut off 600, while for another it's 500. Because of their race. You make sure to adjust your process to save distributive fairness, but you do so at the cost of procedural fairness.
Yes, you do. You do so at the cost, but that's exactly right.
You do.
That's exactly right.
You then owe a debt to reality, and that debt must be paid.
And to morality.
Yeah.
Like, is it really moral to treat the black community as if they're not the equals of the Jews?
No, they're not human. They're not to be treated the same.
You literally, this is what you would do for a child.
But also, how is that debt going to be paid? Well, literally, in this case. It's not. They're going to go bankrupt. So, to fix inequality, we're going to bankrupt random black families because they're black. Fantastic policy.
Bankrupt random institutions.
Well, the entire country, then. Gerbu, for her part, said that the potentially reasonable way... This is a potentially reasonable way to go. You can think of the different score cutoffs.
Whoa, hang on. I don't think it's reasonable to say you're black, therefore we're going to lower the standards for you.
Yeah.
Why? Because you're black.
She runs some charity for AI fairness, so...
Are you sure she doesn't run the KKK? I mean... Like
they're reaching out these days.
I mean, this is literally the opinion of the white nationalists, where they're like, well, the blacks just can't do it because they're inferior.
But then she's
like, yeah, well, that's reasonable.
She gives a reason for trying to bankrupt the black community. You can think of the different score cutoffs as a form of reparations for historical injustices. You should have reparations for people whose ancestors had to struggle for generations rather than punishing them further.
Whose ancestors didn't have to struggle.
Yeah, but also just the idea that this is not punishing them. Like, lowering the standards for the black community so more of them go bankrupt. That's not a punishment. That's a helping hand.
What do you mean by more of them will go bankrupt?
Well, if you give money out to people who can't pay the loans, then those people will not be able to pay and will end up going bankrupt, in which case the rates of interest will be high for everyone.
Bankrupt. They will find themselves in struggling financial circumstances later on.
I know. I'm giving the most extreme example because they're saying their computer model says this guy won't pay it back.
Yeah.
But we're going to give him the loan anyway because of his skin tone. And when he doesn't pay it back, we'll act shocked.
Yeah.
Well, what will happen? You'll have to raise interest on everyone.
But also, why should we not expect the same? I mean, we don't do this for like the Irish or the Italians.
Maybe we should. Why not? Why not just bankrupt the whole country?
We have lower expectations on you. Why? Because you're Irish.
Yeah.
I mean, literally 19th century British policy. I'm pretty sure they used to complain about that.
So there's some other people who think this is a fantastic idea. So Julia Stanovadic, director for NYC Center of Responsible AI, agreed that there should be different FICO scores for racial groups. Responsible AI, racial differentiation, got to be taking place. But she said that the approach is trickier than it sounds because it requires you to collect data on applicants' race, which is a legally protected characteristic.
Oh, right. It's illegal for us to do this.
Yeah, damn stupid Civil Rights Act. Stopping us again. And I mentioned the bankruptcy thing, not for no reason, because if we go to the next one, I don't have a copy of the book, the PDF, but this is the housing boom and bust. And Harry alluded me to this because I was talking it through him with him. And Thomas Sowell has actually noted that, yeah, this was actually a major factor in the 2008 financial crisis.
Oh, yeah. They were packaging together like all sorts of subprime mortgages that people who shouldn't have had them, and then they were called in en masse. And these people couldn't pay them back.
This wasn't just done because people wanted to sell homes. It was also done because of historical injustice. We must hand out loans to minorities.
I bet it was, yeah.
Thomas just has the data as well. In 1993, the Department of Housing and Urban Development started taking legal action against mortgage bankers who turned down a higher percentage of minority applicants than white applicants for mortgage loans. Lenders then began lowering their down payment requirements and income requirements. Fantastic. He goes on to say that Freddie Mae and Freddie Mac ended up just shilling out loads of loans. In plain English, the regulators imposed quotas on the banks. And according to the New York Times, minority homeowners take out a disproportionate share of subprime loans. The most recent Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data from leading institutions show that over half of African Americans and 40% of Hispanics received subprime loans.
And who loses their houses when the banks call these in?
Both groups were especially hard hit by the foreclosures that followed the housing bust.
There we go.
So much for doing a favor for minorities, he writes.
Well, it's true.
That's exactly what's going to happen. You lower the standards, okay, well, people are going to go bankrupt, going to lose their home. Fantastic. You've helped the black community. Good job.
Yeah.
We go back.
The standards are there for a reason. That's the point. The standards are there to ensure things work.
If you go back to the article, because she continues with some other ridiculous examples, she talks about facial recognition software for police surveillance.
Okay, yeah.
Of course, she decides that these models are excellent at identifying white male faces, because those are the sorts of faces they've been commonly trained on. And this is racism, of course. They're notoriously bad at recognizing people with darker skin tones. There is...
How is this not a form of reparations?
Yeah, you would have thought.
If the algorithms can't find you and identify you to be arrested, then you're getting away with a crime. Isn't that a form of reparation?
So the police are going to use facial recognition software. So white people get caught for crimes, but if you've got darker skin, you won't be. She doesn't think that's a problem. She thinks that's fine.
Okay.
But then when it's reversed, of course, she's very upset.
Right.
She goes on to whine about some hilarious examples of when this facial recognition software had to compare to something else, but we'll skip over that. But
that is a bit harsh. I can see why she'd be upset by that.
Yeah, and then she says to fix some of the problems, of course, we just need to train the facial recognition software on more brown-skinned people, and that would fix it.
Sure.
But that would be a problem, though. Given that facial recognition is increasingly used in police surveillance, which disproportionately targets people of color, why is that? Who knows?
That's a big self-report.
A system that is better at identifying black people may also result in some unjust outcomes, such as being caught for crime.
Why would that be unjust?
That would definitely be unjust, according to her. Don't know why.
The police are systemically racist. The justice system is systemically racist.
The AI that says you've committed a crime and I have video evidence because I'm an AI robot camera.
Yeah.
Systemically racist. In a country where crime prevention already associates blackness with inherent criminality, it is not social progress to make black people equally visible to software that will inevitably be further weaponized against us.
Maybe committing fewer crimes is a solution to this.
Yeah, but you also got to remember...
paying back your loans more regularly is a solution to this. This
is another perfect example of just like, homicide. That's the funniest one that people bring up, 1350, right? Well, if you actually break that down, the young black men who go out and commit homicide, who are they killing?
Other young black men.
Yeah, they're not killing people from outside the racial group.
Yep.
So you're actually arguing that, these black people who might be caught by the facial recognition software should just get away with killing more black people to save the black community. So far, we've bankrupted the black community and legalized crime against blacks from other blacks.
I mean, they've done polling on this. When you actually poll the black community in America, one thing they don't want is fewer police. That's a white, Californian and New York City opinion.
Yeah.
That is not the opinion of the black community. In fact, when polled, consistently, the biggest problem they have is with crime.
It's just the number one thing that would help. And legalizing crime, as Vox is proposing, maybe not.
Well, it's basically what they've done in California.
Yeah. Anyway, you might think this is just the ramblings of some leftist lunatic who has been dealing with very hurtful AI that has harmed her feelings so much. Turns out, no. Apparently, there are legislative steps on this.
Oh, yeah.
So some legislative efforts are underway. Senator Ron Wainson has co-sponsored the Algorithmic Accountability Act of 2022. If passed by Congress, it would require companies to conduct impact assessments for bias. Again, the bias against reality is the one that she wants, not the one for reality. Though it wouldn't necessarily direct companies to operationalize fairness in a specific way, while assessments would be welcome. However, in Washington, D.C., Attorney General Carl Ranchi introduced a bill that would make it illegal for companies to use algorithms that discriminate against marginalized groups when it comes to loans, housing, education, jobs, and healthcare in the nation's capital. However, only against minorities. If it does it against the majority group, perfectly fine. Perfectly legal.
But this is the problem, isn't it? Like, they ended up making it illegal to operationalize unfair procedural mechanisms, and now they're stuck with the fact, well, that generates unequal outcomes. They'll say, well, then someone has to change. And it's like, well, it can't be these communities.
It can't be the behavior.
Yeah, it can't be their behavior. They can't be expected to improve. No, we just need to deprove the algorithms.
Yeah, and this is a real legislative step that's being taken in the United States. Apparently, according to this logic, which is that they found out that the AI reflects reality, and reality doesn't cohere to leftist doctrine, as you can see with the Islamophobia and the very base pursuits of what a woman is, apparently, at least according to the AI machine, DALL-E 2. So that's all that, but just another assessment from Vox, which is that minorities just can't be treated as human. They're too precious.
Yeah. I mean, literally treat them like children. That's what they're saying.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the Epoch series, this one between Carl and Bo, on the life of Napoleon, the beginning of the end, part 6. And if you want to follow what else Carl's putting out, you can follow him on Getter at Carl Benjamin on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.